Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 15th of February 2022. The articles which we shall take up today have been displayed on the screen, and let us now begin the discussion.
Which we have taken is extremely important from the perspective of prelims examination. And it's not anything in the news as such, but the issue which the news brings forward, and that is a creation of new states. So basically the news talks about various unresolved issues between Telangana and Andhra Pradesh even after their bifurcation. And these issues have continued even after many years of their separation. And these mainly deals with minor administrative issues which are not a cause of concern for us. But what is a cause of concern is to understand the constitutional provision given under Part 1 of the Constitution of India, which is the Union and its territories. This is the part which not only defines the territorial extent of our country, but also the territorial extent of each and every state, how the area, name, and the shape of each and every state is changed, how they are created, how they are merged, or how they are bifurcated. And no better way to do it but to look at the original constitution text, where you can see Part 1 deals with the Union and its territory. Article 1 of the Constitution, first and foremost, defines the name and territory of the Union, where it says India, that is Bharat. There should be no confusion that India and Bharat are one and the same things, shall be a union of states. And if you focus on these two words, union of states, or these three words, it should be clear to you that rather than using federation of states, the drafters of our constitution very carefully chose the union of states. And so you can clearly see that clause 1 of article 1 not only talks about the name, but also gives us the hint about the polity of India, which shall be a union of states. And why specifically the name union has been chosen? And there are two very specific reasons for that. The first one is that Indian Federation is not a result of an agreement among the states like that of American Federation. And the second one is that the states have no right to secede from the Indian Federation. And so the Indian Federation is a union because it is indestructible. The country is an integral whole and divided into different states only for the convenience of administration. Then the second clause goes on to specify that the states and territories thereof shall be specified in the first schedule. And as you can see on the screen, first schedule is very long, very large, very voluminous, and it takes into account and enumerates all the territory of all the states. Then the third clause specifies the territory of India. The territory of India shall comprise the territories of states, of course, the union territories specified in the first schedule, and such other territories as may be acquired by India later on. Then the constitution makers were also aware of the fact that later on, a lot of states which were earlier hitherto not part of the Indian Union would want to merge with India. And the best example is Sikkim itself. And so they created an article for that as well. Article 2 deals with admission or establishment of new states. And so it says that Parliament may by law admit into the Union or establish new states on such terms and conditions as it thinks fit. Thus, Article 2 grants two kinds of powers to Parliament. The power to admit into the Union of India new states and the power to establish new states. Now you might ask, what is the difference between these two? So the first refers to admission of states which are already in existence, while the second refers to establishment of states which were not in existence before. Notably, Article 2 relates to the admission or establishment of new states that are not part of the Union. Whereas Article 3, if you will focus upon, relates to the formation or changes to existing states of the Union of India. So in other words, Article 3 deals with the internal readjustment of the territories of the constituent states of the Union of India. And so it authorizes the Parliament because it says Parliament may by law, which means that whatever the government has to do with the states, a law is a must. So what Parliament can do by enacting a law. It can form a new state by separation of territory from any state, or by uniting two or more states or parts of states, or by uniting any territory to a part of any state. It can increase the area of any state, and at the same time, it can also diminish the area of any state. Also, it can alter the boundaries of any state as well as the name of the state. But Article 3 comes with a lot of conditions, and those conditions are mentioned later on. And there are two specific conditions mentioned in Article 3. And the first condition is that a bill which wants to bring about the above mentioned changes can be introduced in the Parliament only with the prior recommendation of the President. As you can see, it is clearly written over here. Provided that no bill for the purpose shall be introduced in either House of Parliament except on the recommendation of the President. And the second one is that before recommending the bill, the President has to refer the same to the state legislature concerned for expressing its views within a specified period of time. And that has also been written over here. The bill has been referred by the President to the legislature of that state for expressing its views thereupon within such a period as may be specified in the reference. So you can see that the condition number 1 is prior recommendation of the President for the tabling of the bill, and the second condition is that the President must refer the particular bill to the state legislatures concerned by giving them specified amount of time. So for example, if you have to alter the boundary of Uttar Pradesh, that bill must be sent to UP legislature. And finally, the last article of this part, which says that any law referred to in Article 2 and 3, which means establishment or admittance of new state or alteration of the boundary or the names or territory of the existing state, shall contain such provisions for the amendment of the first schedule as well as the fourth schedule. Now let us know in the comment section what does first schedule deals with, which you have already gone through, and what does fourth schedule deals with. And also let us know why would changes brought in by Article 2 and 3 would bring about changes in first and fourth schedule as well. At the same time, when a new state is being created, first schedule and fourth schedule are being changed. And so, in an indirect way, this would also constitute an amendment to the Constitution. And you know that amending a Constitution is not easy. And so, to make it easy for the Parliament and the President to bring about changes in the internal reorganization of the states, the Constitution under Article 4 specifically says that no such law, which means that no law bringing about changes in the state structure, shall be deemed to be an amendment of this Constitution for the purposes of Article 368. Which basically means that if Parliament wants to change state boundaries, territories, names and whatever, they do not have to follow the procedure established by Article 368, because this does not constitute an amendment of the Constitution according to Article 4.2. So this discussion is extremely pertinent from the perspective of prelims examination. Also, it could be asked in the mains as well, as you saw in 2021 mains, where the provisions related to legislative councils were directly asked. Let us now move on to the next article. The second article for discussion appears as a column on page number 6, Center of Debate, where the chief ministers of opposition parties, opposition as in the center opposition, are contemplating upon forming a convention where all the chief ministers of opposition parties are going to meet and collaborate upon. And so, for example, Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Kerala have decided to meet very regularly to decide a policy to counter the increasing tendencies of the central government and the parliament to encroach upon the federal structure of the country, or to take away the rights of the state. Because in past 3 to 4 months, there have been a lot of instances which point to the direction of increasing centralization of the Indian polity. For example, today itself we are going to discuss All India Services Rules Amendment. Then we have seen how farm laws were brought despite agriculture being a state subject. Then we have seen how the states were not given the GST compensation cess. And so, in this regard, we are going to initiate our discussion by first understanding why we need a federation. Why is there a need to delegate power to regional units? It's important for various reasons. Once we have understood that, we will go on and understand the issues and challenges with respect to the federal structure of our country, because it forms a part of your GS Paper 2 syllabus. Let us now begin the discussion. Now, before going into federalism as a word, let us now first understand why is there a need for a country to adopt a federal system of government. Now, if you look at the countries across the world, they come in all shapes and sizes. They are made up of many different types of people from various kinds of backgrounds trying to live together as a nation. Now, how do we ensure that all these diverse people get sufficient political representation? And one of the ways to enable people from different backgrounds to live together is federalism. So put very simply, federalism is a system of government in which the power is divided between a central authority and multiple regional authorities. Now someone might ask, why is there a need to create two levels of government, and how is it going to exactly help people from diverse backgrounds in living together as one nation? And the simple answer is by sharing their power over the things they have in common, like the trade with the outside world or international trade. So a group of people, let's say A, B, C, they could be different in terms of language, ethnicity, but they see themselves as one as compared to the outside world. And so, as far as international trade is concerned, they would want to deal with that as an entity together. Or for example, they want to fend off an foreign attack. They want to draw a boundary, an international boundary. For that purpose, they would like to see themselves as one, and so they would give up their powers on these matters and create a central authority known as center, which will look after these matters. But at the same time, these groups maintain some level of self-rule over those things that are not common. For example, education, primary health care, or for that matter, broadcasting. Each of A, B, and C would want to deal with these matters independently, and for that, they would like to keep that power to themselves in the regional government. And so, over the years, federalism has been recognized as the best system of the government to protect diversity in a population, because you have given powers to themselves to manage their own affairs in a lot of things. And for specifically doing this, you need first and foremost a written constitution which is not very easy to change, which is some kind of a rigid constitution which cannot be amended by parliament or by the central legislature. The constitution itself should create two levels of government. So right now I want your utmost attention. There are a lot of countries, for example China, which also has local governments, but still China is not a federal government because the constitution of China does not guarantees the perpetuation of these regional territories. You need these states to have existence independent of the center. And so the constitution creates two governments and itself divides the power between the center and the regional territories. Only then it will become a federation. And the best example of that would be United States of America, would be India, would be Australia, and also Canada. All these four nations are examples of federation, but the way the federations are arranged vary a lot from one country to another. And now let us look at India and try to understand whether India is a federation or not. India has a written constitution, which is true. Also, it has constitutional supremacy. At the same time, it is very difficult to amend the constitution of India without the approval of the states if those provisions deal with the matters related to states. The constitution itself has created the two levels of government under part 5 and under part 6. Also, India has a bicameralism or bicameral parliament where we have a house known as Council of States, or also known as Rajya Sabha, which is about giving representation to the states at the central level. And then we have independent judiciary to make sure that the central government does not transgresses into the affairs of the states. So now we can see that India is a federation. But the problem is that there are a lot of mechanisms, there are a lot of provisions of the Constitution of India and the way they are carried out, which makes us believe that India is not truly a federal system, but rather a federal system with a unitary bias. And it is specifically because of this particular bias that most of the challenges to our federalism come from. And now we are going to understand those challenges and what Punchi and Sarkaria Commission have recommended in that accordance. And the main areas of concern mainly lies with the legislative powers or the way they have been divided, emergency provisions, office of the governor and the functioning of the governor, parliamentary legislation in the state fields, centralization of the amendment process of the constitution, and unequal representation given to the states in Council of States or the Rajya Sabha. And let us now deal with each one of them one by one. Now, as we have seen that federalism is all about division of powers and hence the legislative powers between the central and the state governments. And so in India you have list 1 in which the center has the prerogative to make laws, state 2 where generally the states make laws but under certain special circumstances even the center can make laws, and concurrent list where both center and the states have the power to legislate laws. And then there is residuary power. The items which have not been mentioned anywhere in the constitution which lies completely with the center. So if there is a new item on which there is a need for a law, the center is the one which is going to enact the law. So this is one of the most important and crucial points of disagreement between the states and the center and creates most problems. Because in the United States of American Constitution, the residuary power lies with the states. In fact, there is only one list which has been mentioned in the constitution and rest everything lies with the states, and that is why it is the best example of federation. And this is more like the Canadian constitution where the residuary power rests with the center. On matters of concurrent list, if both the center and the state enact law, and if the provisions clash, the central legislation would prevail. This is also a big cause of concern for the states. And we know that there are a lot of bills which can be reserved by the governor for the approval of the president on its own discretion. And all these three matters respectively are the ones which are creating challenges to our federalism. And in this regard, Punche Commission has recommended two important things. The first is that Punche Commission has recommended a set of broad agreement between the center and the state on the matters related to list 3. It has recommended that it is of utmost importance that a broad agreement be reached between the union and the states before introducing any particular legislation in parliament on matters of concurrent list. If there is a concurrence or an agreement before the introduction of the law, there would be no problem. And then it has recommended extreme restraint on behalf of the central government when it comes to enactment of a law which has not been mentioned either in list 1, list 2 or list 3 of schedule 7, which is the residuary list. Then the next set of challenges come from the emergency provisions which have been contained in part 18 of our constitution, starting from article 352 and going up to article 360. Of course, these provisions have been created to enable the central government to meet any abnormal situation which might arise, and the rationale behind the incorporation of these provisions is to safeguard the sovereignty, unity and integrity of our country. But in practicality, what these provisions do is that they convert the federal character of our country to that of a completely unitary system. We know that imposition of national emergency makes unitary government all powerful with respect to the country. Similarly, the application of 356 or Article 356 or the precedent rule does the same for that particular state. And so it converts the federation into a unitary system without even going through a constitutional amendment, and that is what the problems state have with respect to these provisions. Apart from that, you have provisions in our constitution which enable the central to give directive to states. Let us know in the comment section which are those articles which enable the central government to direct the states to carry out certain responsibilities. And there is another article which says that if states fail to abide by the central directives, then it shall be legal on behalf of the central government to impose the precedent rule. And so in this particular regard, the Punche Commission has recommended the complete implementation of S.R. Bommai versus Union of India 1994 judgment, which set out a series of guidelines for the imposition of the precedent rule in a state. Of course, if we start discussing S.R. Bommai judgment, it will make this particular discussion very long, but in particular, it has laid down few rules which has to be followed by the governor before recommending imposition of precedent rule or dismissing of Council of Ministers in a state. Then all of us know that office of governor has been a long vexatious issue with respect to the states. be it the manner of appointment of a governor or reservation of bills by him or her, whether it is about appointment of chief minister in case of hung assembly, and be it about recommendation of president rules. All of the provisions given in the Constitution of India and the way they are actually used in day-to-day life have ruffled a lot of feathers with the state governments. And hence, most of the states and the committees constituted by them to rework the Constitution of India have recommended changes in the way the governor is appointed. And so in this regard, the Punchi Commission has recommended quite a few things. First and foremost, the Punchi Commission has given very extensive guidelines as to who can become governor of a state. And they mainly deal with a non-political person, a person not belonging to that particular state and not actively involved in politics should be appointed as a governor. Then Punchi Commission has recommended a fixed 5-year tenure just like all other constitutional posts. Because when a tenure is fixed, you cannot lure that person into acting in your interest. If a tenure is fixed, the governor can act against the will of the central government also. Right now, governors act in accordance with the center because they know they can be removed at any time. And so because of that, the Punchi Commission has recommended a proper impeachment process just like that of president. And these two, when combined, will give much needed autonomy to the post of governor and the way she functions. Then, we know that when state legislatures pass a bill, they can be reserved by the governor for the consideration by the president. And what they do is that they generally do not transmit it to the governor. They sit on it forever. And so the Punchi Commission has recommended an amendment in the Constitution by inserting a clause that the bill can be reserved for at max 6 months. If the 6 months have passed, it will have to be sent back to the legislature. Then we also know that in cases of hung assembly, where no clear party or coalition gets the full majority, it matters a lot who is invited for the first time to form the government, because then they hold power for some amount of time, and in that they can do a lot of horse trading. And so the role of governor becomes very, very crucial in those circumstances. And so the Punchi Commission has recommended quite a detailed set of guidelines which has to be followed by the governors for inviting people to form government. And as far as the recommendation of president rules is concerned, again, the S.R. Bommai judgment's guidelines have to be followed. The only condition is that the governor cannot and should not dismiss any state government and a council of ministers without the floor test. Now, it is important to know that before S.R. Bommai judgment in 1994, the governors used to dismiss the council of ministers just by writing that this government does not command the majority on the floor of the legislature. And now the S.R. Bommai judgment has made it mandatory to conduct the floor test, and only if the Council of Ministers is not able to prove their majority on the house of the legislature, only then they can be dismissed. Now, if you compare the emergency provisions in Office of Governor from that of USA, there is no provision of emergency-like feature in USA, and the Office of Governor is not that of an appointee from the central government, but rather he or she is an elected person holding or commanding the real powers. And after completing these three major challenges, let us now look at some minor issues, starting with unequal representation. Now, if you look at the Constitution of Rajya Sabha, which is the Council of States, all the states have varying degree of representation depending upon their population. But since it is a Council of States, most of the federations have given equal representation to all the states. For example, in USA, all the states have 2 members in the Senate, which is their Council of States. Now here the problem is that in case of India, parties commanding state governments in the largest states, for example Bihar, UP, Maharashtra, Karnataka, actually control the Rajya Sabha. And so rest other 24 states actually do not matter if you have state governments in 5 to 6 large states. And this is a problem because as a council of states, you should have equal representation of all the states. And so that is why the Punchi Commission has recommended amendment to the constitution to enable the equality of seats in the Rajya Sabha as well. Then states complain a lot about centralization of the amendment process. Because if you look at the way Article 368 has defined the process of the amendment of the constitution, it is very, very centralized, because if an amendment to the constitution has to be initiated, it will only come and it can only come from parliament. There is no way for the states. So if the states feel that there is something wrong with the constitution, they cannot pass any kind of proposal in their legislatures. And apart from that, major part of the constitution can be amended without the approval of the states. And even if a particular provision requires an approval, let's say half of the states, after giving their consent, they cannot withdraw from it after some time. So these are the problem with respect to the amendment procedure of the constitution, with respect to which the Punchi Commission has not recommended anything. Then the states also raised this issue of parliamentary legislation in a state field. Let us know in the comment section what are the 4 conditions in which the parliament can actually enact or enable a lot of legislations in the second list of 7 schedule. And just like amendment to the constitution, Punchi Commission has not recommended any particular suggestion or recommendation in this manner as well. This next article for discussion appears on the page Text and Context, which is a new addition to e-paper of the Hindu. The fight against antimicrobial resistance. Antimicrobial resistance, or the resistance of the microbes to the antibiotics or commonly used antibiotics. And according to World Health Organization, it causes around 16 lakh or 1.6 million people dying every year as a result of this. WHO and India's Ministry of Health and Family Welfare both have categorized antimicrobial resistance as top 10 priorities or among top 10 threats to the medicine and science. And so exactly because of this reason, it is important for us to discuss what is antimicrobial resistance, how does it leads to the development of or genesis of superbugs which are very difficult to eliminate from human body, and what are the causes behind the rise in the number of antimicrobial resistance cases in the parasites. But before that, it is important for us to understand what exactly is antimicrobial resistance and how is it developed. And that we are going to understand through a demonstration. So whenever we look at our bodies, we tend to think about ourselves as humans. But this is only partly true. As all of us know, we are composed of trillions of human cells. But at the same time, we are also made up of trillions of bacteria. These bacteria are part of us, although it may sound very surprising, but it is true. They cover our entire skin and guts. One of the purposes which these bacteria serve is to help us digest the food that we eat and protect us from intruders. But some bacteria at the same time have the potential to be harmful, causing disease that risk human life and bring about suffering to us. And so we discovered antibiotics. And for a time, it was effective and good. Antibiotics are produced by fungi and bacteria in nature and were adopted by humans to be used as a medicine. And it is important to understand that antibiotics are unlike most other medicines. They do not affect or impact the activity of the human cells in any way. When exposed to antibiotics, only the bacteria die, and that is important, while the human cells remain unharmed and the disease is cured. And so antibiotics made once very deadly diseases as harmless as common cold. And they have been responsible for enabling many of the improvements in modern medicine and science, such as ensuring safe invasive surgeries like heart surgeries and transplants of various organs. But as we all know, some of the bacteria survive the antibiotic treatment. And how does that happen? And for that, there is a need for us to look back. And if you look in the very beginning, even before the antibiotic exposure, some bacteria were already very different. These bacteria had a resistance gene that protected the bacteria from the antibiotic action. And so when the antibiotic was introduced into the body, it did not kill the bacteria that had this particular gene, and instead they survived. And this is what is known as antibiotic resistance, the resistance of some bacteria to antibiotics. But the question is, where did this resistance gene actually come from? How was this resistance gene there to start with? And that is even before the bacteria was exposed to antibiotics. Each time bacteria divide, their DNA undergoes random mutations, while most of these mutations are neutral or unrelated to antibiotics at all. But very rarely, these mutations can result in resistance to antibiotics. And there is a very special quality of bacteria. They can even swap genes among themselves. And since most of the times these genes are unrelated to antibiotic resistance, it's not a cause of concern. But very rarely, bacteria indeed do swap this resistance gene as well. And even though it is very random and happens very, very rarely, because there are so many bacteria in the world, and because they divide so fast, every hour or less to say the least, for each antibiotic we create, there is already a resistance gene out there. And because these bacteria swap genes so frequently, these resistance gene can reach by chance to disease causing bacteria, making these diseases much more harder to cure. And these resistance genes appear and spread randomly. But each time we use antibiotics, we make these rare and random events much more significant. While the antibiotics kill most of the sensitive bacteria, leaving the resistance bacteria to survive and multiply in numbers. And hence, you can easily understand their proportions in the population increase very rapidly. And this is what we call as evolution of antibiotic resistance. And these resistance bacteria can very easily spread in the environment. And so each time humans use antibiotics, resistant strains become more and more prevalent everywhere. I hope by now it is clear to you what antimicrobial resistance is and how is it generated. And if we have to write an answer in the mains examination or concept for prelims examination, we can say that antimicrobial resistance is the resistance acquired by any microorganism, be it bacteria, virus, fungi, parasite, against antimicrobial drugs such as antibiotics against bacteria, antifungals against fungus, antivirals against viral infectious diseases, and antimalarials against plasmodium. As a result, standard treatment becomes ineffective, which then results in creation of superbugs, the bugs or the parasites which cannot be easily killed. And so it is important for us to understand what are the causes behind the creation of these superbugs or how are they becoming more in number. And there are four main causes. The first one we have already watched that in demonstration, microbial behavior. As soon as scientists introduce a new antimicrobial drug, there is a good chance that it will become ineffective at some point in time, and this is due primarily to changes occurring within the microbes. Then, the next important reason is the key reason why we are seeing such a rapid increase in the number of AMR cases, and that deals with people's behavior. Not following recommendations for the use of some drugs can increase the risk of antimicrobial resistance. The way in which people use antimicrobial drugs is a significant contributing factor. For example, doctors sometimes prescribe antimicrobials just in case, or they prescribe broad spectrum antimicrobials when a specific drug would be more suitable. This increases the risk of AMR. Then, if a person does not complete a course of antimicrobial drugs, some microbes may survive and develop resistance to that drug. Also, antibiotics recommended by quacks or pharmacists contribute to magnify the issue. Then, use of antibiotics in farm animals can promote drug resistance. Scientists have found that drug-resistant bacteria in meat and food crops that have exposure to fertilizers or contaminated water. In this way, diseases that affect animals can pass to humans as well. Then, people who are critically ill often receive high doses of antimicrobials. This encourages the spread of AMR microbes, particularly in an environment where various diseases are present simultaneously. And so this increase of antimicrobial resistance is not only a threat to prevention and treatment of infections, but at the same time it also results in failure to treat infections caused by resistant bacteria, which increases the cost of healthcare and results in lengthier stays in hospital. It is exactly because of this reason that the government had come up with National Action Plan on AMR Resistance in 2017 to 21, which focused on One Health approach with an aim of involving various stakeholders like ministries and departments. Similarly, National Health Policy 2017 highlighted the problem of antimicrobial resistance and calls for effective action to address it. Similarly, Delhi Declaration on Antibiotic Resistance. An interministerial consensus was signed by the ministers of concerned ministries, pledging their support in AMR containment. Then, Antimicrobial Resistance Surveillance Network was established by ICMR in 2013. Then, since March 2014, a separate Schedule H1 has been incorporated in drug and cosmetic rules to regulate the sale of antimicrobials in the country. So you can easily understand that not only antimicrobial resistance is a cause of concern, but the government of India at national level has taken a lot of steps to counter it. But there is a need to urgently address AMR through the lens of one human, animal, and environment health approach. All countries need to work together to limit the spread of AMR between humans, animals, and environment in highly globalized world where we live in. Even though national action plans have been laid down by most countries, these plans have yet to move from paper to the ground as antibiotics continue to be freely available and highly used. Let us now move on to the next article. Incorrect diagnosis is a very important article which appears on page number 7. And it talks about the amendments proposed to Rule 6.1 of Indian Administrative Services Cadre Rules of 1954, which seek to empower the central government to unilaterally order the central deputation of IAS officers even without the consent of the state governments or the officers concerned, and these changes have provoked a big controversy. As you might be aware that people or officers belonging to All India Services, and IAS is one of the All India Services, other being Indian Police Service and Indian Forest Service, are basically shared among or in between center and state government. They basically belong to one of the state cadres, and whenever the central government needs their services at the central level, they are called upon on a central deputation. But in order for an officer to serve at a central level, you require a willingness on behalf of the officer, that is condition number 1, and permission from the state government. If the state government refuses to relieve a particular officer, that officer might not be able to serve in the central government. And because of which, central government has come up with an amendment which will do away these two conditions. And so the obvious question which arises, why are we going to discuss this news in detail? And the reason behind that is if you look into the GS Paper 2 syllabus, role of civil services in a democracy is a part of your syllabus. A role of civil services in a democracy includes multiple things. It includes all other things which directly or indirectly impact the service condition of these officers as well. Apart from that, issues related to federal structure of the country is also a part of your syllabus. And obviously because of these amendments, there seems to be quite a conflict between central and state governments because these rules will allow the transfer or deputation of the state cadre officers to the central level even without the assent of the state governments. And so the obvious question arises, why has government come up with this amendment? And there are two reasons which have been stated by the central government. One of them is of course true. There is an acute shortage of mid-level IAS officers, especially deputy secretaries and directors at the central level. Apart from that, there are some states like Tamil Nadu and West Bengal which are often reluctant to offer their cadres All India Services officers to the central government for a central deputation. So for example, if a person is serving as an IAS officer in West Bengal, there are very slim chances that that particular officer is ever going to serve at the central level. And in fact, there are very rare cases or almost no cases of a IAS or IPS officer serving at central government level belonging to West Bengal cadre. And the reason is that traditionally West Bengal government has never relieved an All India Service officer to serve the central government. And this of course is a problem not just for central government but for officers as well. Because after all, serving as a district magistrate for 2-3 terms is more than enough to gain ground experience, and then people want career progression as policy makers and they would want to serve at central level, but state government do not release them. And so these are the two reasons which have been given for coming up with this amendment. Now the question arises, why is there an acute shortage of All India Services officer at the central level? And this is where this particular editorial comes very handy. And they talk about 4 very specific very obvious and very pertinent reasons because of which there is an acute shortage of officers at the central level. And according to the author, not all the causes deal with the state government, but rather the malice lies at the central level. Because first and foremost, if you look at the annual recruitment by UPSC, or basically the final result, you will see that there is a drastic reduction in the annual recruitment of IAS officers after 1991 on the pretext of liberalization. And so, in 2019, there was a shortage of 23% IAS officers at an all India level. So, if there are 100 seats allocated to IAS officers, there were only 77 IAS officers. Then the next reason belongs to the state governments. There are a lot of posts where the state government has designated that an IAS officer is going to serve at that particular position. And this designation was done as early as 1950s or 60s. And these decisions have not been reviewed so far. It doesn't even matter if those departments are relevant even now or not, because there has been no review after the rules have been formulated. And so, even if these departments have continued to decline in their importance or their relevance, they still continue to be headed by IAS officers, which is quite a waste of talent and human resource as far as the government setup is concerned. Then, there is also a reason at the central government which deals with the discontinuance of direct recruitment of officers to the Central Secretariat Services Group B since 2000. These were the officers who eventually, in the last 10 years of their services, would actually get promoted to joint secretary level, and this practice has been continued, leading to the shortage. Apart from that, we know that people making it to provisional services, or what is otherwise known as PCS services, after completing a fixed amount of years get promoted to IAS. But the central government has never taken a promotee IAS officer at the central deputation. And this is quite a discrimination because there is a huge pool of resource and talent lying at the state level who were basically PCS officers later on promoted to IAS. And so, an author makes a strong case for all these people to be taken at the central deputation, arguing that these people have same designation and achievement as direct UPSC recruited IAS officers. And so, according to the author, these four things should be immediately done. The first thing is cadre review. Proper cadre review in all states will release a lot of IAS officers from non-strategic posts. Then, according to the author, it should be made mandatory for state level officers to work for at least 2 years on central deputation. Directly recruited IAS officers must serve 3 years on central deputation between 9 years and 25 years of service. And center should directly choose its joint secretaries, additional secretaries and secretaries from among IAS officers on offer who are officiating in equivalent grades in state governments. So this forms for a very relevant question in mains examination, and this much information is more than sufficient to be able to answer any question dealing with the rules and their amendments. Let us now move on to the next news. Zooming in on the potential of India's geospatial sector is the last article for today, and it appeared on the editorial page of the Hindu newspaper. And the article talks about the new set of guidelines which were released on 15th of Feb 2021, exactly a year ago, which talked about complete deregulation of geospatial sector for Indians. So what is geospatial sector? Is it related to space? No, as you can see, it is a combination of two words, geo, which means geography, and spatial means location. And so in most simple terms, any data that is indicated by or related to a geographic location would constitute a geospatial technology or a part of geospatial sector. So any kind of satellite taking visual images of Indian map would constitute a geospatial sector, or any digital technology mapping India's locations, for example Google Map, would also constitute a geospatial sector. But at the same time, authors also talk about the key issues of this sector. And so it is important for us to discuss the key issues or challenges in the geospatial sector and what are the solutions which we have to offer. So as we all know that India has a very robust ecosystem in geospatial sciences, because India has Survey of India as an institute. Then we have ISRO, the most prestigious organization which the country has produced. Then we have remote sensing application centers and National Informatics Center or NIC. However, the full benefits of this sector have yet to percolate to the public, and that is because of the various issues which this particular sector is facing. For example, the first challenge which this sector faces is the lack of demand. There is no demand for geospatial services and products on a scale linked to India's potential size. And this is mainly due to the lack of awareness among potential users in the government as well as in the private sector. Then, of course, just like all other fields, we lack skilled manpower. Then there is an extreme unavailability of foundation data, especially at high resolution, which is a mandatory condition for using a geospatial data for policy making. And then there is a lack of clarity on data sharing, which ultimately hinders all kind of collaboration and prevents co-creation and asset maximization. And so in this regard, authors suggest a few remedial measures or solutions. The first one is that there is a need to publish a policy document which should make not just the government but also the private players aware about the utility of geospatial and its data in various kinds of services. Then there is a need for a strong data sharing protocol. As you can understand that government has vast amount of geospatial data, and the data available with the government should be unlocked and data sharing should be encouraged and facilitated. Then the government needs to invest in developing standards and must mandate the adoption of standards. Then, as we have discussed, while different types of data will be produced on a project to project basis, there is a need to generate foundation data across the country. This should include Indian National Digital Elevation Model or NDM, data layers for cities, and data of natural resources. Then, local technology and solutions should be promoted and competition should be encouraged for quality output. And finally, unlike the West, India lacks a strata of core professionals who understand geospatial end to end. India should start a bachelor's program in geospatial sciences in premier institutes like IITs, NITs, and Indian Institute of Science Education and Researches. Besides these, there should be a dedicated geospatial university. So these are some of the recommendations given by these authors. Although it is not a very important topic, but it fits peripherally to the syllabus of GS Paper 3 Science and Technology. This is it for today. Let us now have a look at the question of the day.